The moment Elena saw another woman's lips touch Daniel's cheek, everything she'd carefully ignored for the past year came crashing down around her. She wasn't supposed to care this much. He wasn't supposed to mean this much. But standing there, frozen behind her kitchen curtain, watching that simple goodbye unfold in his driveway, Elena realized she'd been lying to herself all along. And now? Now it was too late to pretend anymore. If you want to know how a single kiss between friends can unravel two hearts that were too afraid to admit what they really wanted, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Daniel Moore had learned to measure his life in small, manageable pieces. Morning started at 6:15 a.m., always 6:15, never earlier, never later. The coffee maker gurgled to life while he moved through the darkened kitchen, his bare feet silent against the cool tile. By 6:30, he'd have 2 lunches packed, one with the crust cut off, apple slices in a small container, and a juice box tucked into the side pocket. The other, his own, was whatever leftovers he could throw together without thinking too hard. By 6:45, he'd hear the soft padding of smaller feet on the stairs. "Morning, Dad?" "Morning, baby girl." 7-year-old Sophie Moore was not a morning person, but she was a creature of routine, just like her father. She'd shuffle into the kitchen, her dark hair a wild mess around her face, still wearing the oversized t-shirt she insisted was the most comfortable thing in the world. Daniel would already have her favorite bowl on the table, the one with the faded cartoon characters she'd loved since she was 3, filled with cereal and milk measured to the exact level she preferred. Not too much milk. Never too much. "Sleep okay?" Daniel would ask, the same question every morning. "Mm-hmm," Sophie would mumble, spooning cereal into her mouth with the focused concentration of someone still half asleep. These were the rhythms Daniel had built over the past 3 years. Small routines, predictable patterns, a life held together by consistency because consistency meant Sophie felt safe, and Sophie feeling safe was the only thing that mattered anymore. The outside world saw a competent single father who had his life together. They saw a man who showed up on time for parent-teacher conferences, who volunteered for school field trips, who could braid his daughter's hair into something reasonably neat by the 3rd or 4th YouTube tutorial. What they didn't see were the late nights when Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table, the house finally quiet, wondering if he was doing any of this right. If Sophie would remember these years as stable and loving, or if she'd later realize all the ways her father had been fumbling through darkness, hoping he didn't break anything irreplaceable. The neighborhood itself was a refuge, tree-lined streets on the eastern edge of Boise, where houses sat far enough apart that you had privacy but close enough that you still waved to your neighbors. Daniel had chosen this place deliberately. After everything fell apart, after the funeral he still couldn't think about without his chest tightening, after the endless condolence casseroles and the well-meaning relatives who eventually went back to their own lives, Daniel had packed up what remained of his small family and moved here. A fresh start. A quiet start. His house was a modest 2-story craftsman with blue-gray siding and white trim that needed repainting. The front porch had 2 rocking chairs Daniel had refinished himself, and a small garden bed where Sophie had planted wildflower seeds last spring. Most had died, but a few stubborn blooms kept returning, bright patches of color against the mulch. The work Daniel did was flexible, freelance repair and restoration. He'd stumbled into it years ago, back when money was tight, and he'd started fixing things for neighbors just to make ends meet. Turned out he was good at it, patient, detail-oriented. He could take something broken, a chair with a wobbly leg, a vintage radio that hadn't worked in decades, a kitchen cabinet with a door hanging crooked, and make it whole again. There was something meditative about repair work, something that made sense in a way the rest of life often didn't. You identified the problem. You gathered your tools. You worked carefully, methodically, until the thing was fixed. No ambiguity. No wondering if you'd done enough or said the right thing. Just the quiet satisfaction of restoring function to something that had been broken. Most of his clients found him through word of mouth. He'd work in their homes while Sophie was at school, finishing up before the 3:15 p.m. pickup time that governed his entire schedule. The work paid enough to keep them comfortable, and more importantly, it let him be present. Let him be the one waiting at the curb when Sophie's class was dismissed, the one who heard about her day firsthand, the one who could drop everything if the school nurse called. Being present was everything now. Sophie didn't remember her mother clearly anymore. She'd been only 4 when they lost her, but Daniel remembered enough for both of them. He remembered Rebecca's laugh, the way she danced in the kitchen while cooking dinner, how she'd sung off-key lullabies until Sophie fell asleep. He remembered the accident, the phone call, the way the world had simply stopped making sense for a while. But he didn't talk about it. Not to Sophie, who asked fewer and fewer questions as the years passed. Not to the neighbors, who'd learned not to pry. Not even to himself most days, because what good did it do to pick at old wounds? Instead, Daniel baked. Late at night, after Sophie was asleep and the house settled into its nighttime creaks and sighs, Daniel would pull out mixing bowls and measuring cups, cookies mostly, chocolate chip, oatmeal raisin, snickerdoodles, recipes he'd learned from Rebecca, recipes he'd perfected through countless batches. The process soothed him. Cream butter and sugar until fluffy. Add eggs one at a time. Fold in flour and leavening agents with a gentle hand. Baking required precision but rewarded intuition. You could follow a recipe exactly and still need to adjust for humidity, oven temperature, the particular quirks of your ingredients. It was a conversation between the baker and the dough, and Daniel had learned to listen. Most of what he baked, he gave away. Neighbors found containers of cookies on their porches. Teachers received tins of brownies as thank yous. Sophie's classmates celebrated birthdays with cupcakes Daniel had frosted with meticulous care. He didn't need the thanks or the praise. He just needed the ritual of creation, the alchemy of transforming simple ingredients into something that brought small moments of sweetness into the world. It was during one of these late-night baking sessions, about a year ago, that Daniel had first really noticed Elena Wright. She lived in the house directly next door, a charming cottage-style home painted a soft yellow with white shutters and a front door the color of robin's eggs. Daniel had seen her around, of course. They'd exchanged polite waves, the occasional nice weather we're having, small talk, when they both happened to be checking their mailboxes at the same time. He knew she was a teacher, elementary school, art classes, and that she lived alone. Beyond that, she'd been just another neighbor in a neighborhood full of people Daniel was friendly with, but never quite let close. That night, he'd been pulling a batch of cookies from the oven around 11 p.m. when he noticed her kitchen light was on. Through the window, he could see her moving around, and on impulse, or maybe because the batch had turned out particularly well, he'd plated up half a dozen cookies, walked next door, and knocked softly. She'd answered in paint-stained jeans and an oversized sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, surprise evident on her face. "Daniel? Is everything okay?" "Yeah, sorry, I know it's late. He'd held out the plate. "Made too many. Thought you might want some." Elena had looked at the cookies, then back at his face, and something in her expression had shifted. Not suspicion exactly, but a kind of careful curiosity, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle she hadn't known existed. "That's really sweet of you, thank you." She'd taken the plate, and for a moment they just stood there in the pool of her porch light, neither quite sure how to end the interaction. Then she'd smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, and said, "They smell amazing." Old family recipe, Daniel had said, which was true but also felt inadequate. "Anyway, enjoy. Have a good night." He'd turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Daniel?" He'd looked back. "If you ever need anything, if Sophie ever needs anything, I'm right here, okay?" It was a simple offer, the kind neighbors made all the time, but the way she'd said it, with a directness that suggested she meant it literally, had caught him off guard. "Thanks, Elena. Same goes for you." After that, something shifted. It started small. Elena began leaving things on his porch. Banana bread wrapped in wax paper, a container of homemade soup, muffins still warm from her oven. Always with a little note. "Thought you might enjoy these. Wore E," or "Made extras. Hope you and Sophie like lemon poppy seed." Daniel, in turn, started noticing things that needed fixing. A loose railing on her back steps, a shutter that hung slightly crooked, a garden gate that stuck. He'd mentioned them casually. "Hey, I noticed your gate is catching. Mind if I take a look?" And she'd always say yes, often standing nearby while he worked, asking questions about what he was doing, genuinely interested in the mechanics of repair. They developed a rhythm, unspoken but reliable. She'd bring food, he'd fix things. She'd comment on the flowers Sophie had planted. He'd ask how her latest art project with the kids had gone. Conversations that started at the property line began extending to her front porch, then to his kitchen table, then to those late evenings when Sophie was already in bed and Elena would tap on his door with a bottle of wine and an offering of whatever she'd baked that day. "I know you're the baker in this relationship," she'd said once, settling into the chair across from him while he worked on refinishing an old picture frame, "but I make a decent apple crisp." Relationship. The word had hung in the air for just a moment, and Daniel had felt something flutter in his chest before logic kicked in. She'd meant friendship, neighborly relationship, nothing more. "Your apple crisp is better than decent," he'd said, focusing on the sandpaper in his hands. "It's incredible." "You're biased." "I'm honest." Elena had laughed, and the sound had settled into the kitchen like warmth from the oven. That's how it went for months. Easy, comfortable. A friendship that asked for nothing more than what they were already giving. Daniel told himself that's all it was, all it needed to be. His life was full enough. Sophie, work, the careful routines that kept everything stable. He didn't have room for complications, and even if he did, Elena was, well, she was Elena. Smart and kind and beautiful in a way that seemed effortless. Surely she wasn't interested in a widowed single father whose idea of an exciting Friday night was trying a new cookie recipe. Sophie, however, had different ideas. "I like Miss Elena," she'd announced one morning over breakfast, about 6 months into this evolving friendship. "That's good, baby. She's nice." "She's really nice, and she smells like flowers." Daniel had smiled. "That's her perfume, probably." "Are you going to marry her?" He'd nearly choked on his coffee. "What?" "No, Sophie, we're just friends." "But you smile different when she's here." "I smile the same all the time." "No, you don't." "You." Sophie had given him a look that was far too perceptive for a 7-year-old. "You smile with your regular smile most of the time. But when Miss Elena comes over, you smile with your eyes too." Daniel had not known what to do with that observation, so he deflected. "Finish your cereal. We need to leave in 10 minutes. But the comment had lodged itself somewhere in his mind, and he'd started noticing things he'd been carefully not noticing before. The way his mood lifted when he saw Elena's car pull into her driveway. How he'd started timing his evening yard work to coincide with when she usually got home from school. The fact that he'd bought better coffee specifically because she'd mentioned she loved a good cup in the evening. He wasn't developing feelings. He was just appreciating a good friend. That's what he told himself. Elena, for her part, seemed content with the easy rhythm they'd found. She never pushed for more, never hinted at anything beyond friendship. If anything, she seemed almost as careful as Daniel about maintaining certain boundaries. She never stayed too late, never asked questions that probed too deeply into his past, never made Sophie uncomfortable with her presence. There was something almost old-fashioned about it, this slow building of trust, this careful tending of connection without demanding it grow into something else. Until the afternoon, everything changed. It was a Tuesday in late October, unseasonably warm for Boise at that time of year. Daniel had spent the morning replacing the back deck boards on a client's house across town and had picked up Sophie from school at the usual time. They'd stopped at the grocery store, and Sophie had convinced him to buy ingredients for pumpkin cookies, which meant their kitchen was now covered in flour and cinnamon, while Billie Holiday played softly from the speaker on the counter. "Dad, I think I added too much pumpkin," Sophie said, peering into the mixing bowl with concern. "Let me see." Daniel moved beside her, examining the orange-tinted dough. "Nah, that looks perfect. You've got good instincts, kiddo." She beamed at the praise, and Daniel felt that familiar surge of fierce love that sometimes hit him out of nowhere. This small person covered in flour, tongue poking out in concentration as she measured vanilla extract. She was his whole world. The doorbell rang just as they were dropping spoonfuls of dough onto baking sheets. "I'll get it," Sophie said, already running toward the front door. "Wash your hands first," Daniel called after her, but she was already gone. He sighed, wiped his own hands on a dish towel, and followed. Through the front door's side window, he could see a familiar figure. Jessica Torres, an old friend from his college days who'd moved to Boise about a year ago. They'd reconnected through social media and had grabbed coffee a few times, trading stories about their respective lives. Jessica was a social worker, sharp and funny, with a direct way of speaking that Daniel appreciated. She was also one of the few people who knew the full story of what had happened with Rebecca, which made her easy to talk to in a way most people weren't. "Jess?" Daniel opened the door with a genuine smile. "What are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood visiting a client and thought I'd stop by. Hope that's okay?" "Of course, come in. We're making cookies. Sophie's making cookies. I'm supervising." "Hi, Miss Jessica." Sophie waved from where she'd finally stopped at the bathroom to wash her hands. "Hey, Sophie, are you making something delicious?" "Pumpkin cookies. My favorite." They'd moved into the kitchen, and Jessica had settled at the counter while Daniel and Sophie finished prepping the last batch. The conversation was easy, comfortable, Jessica telling stories about her work, Daniel sharing a funny incident from a recent repair job, Sophie interjecting with random observations about her school day. It was normal, pleasant, exactly the kind of low-key social interaction Daniel had grown comfortable with. After the cookies were in the oven and Sophie had been convinced to go play in the living room, Jessica and Daniel had stood on the front porch continuing their conversation. She'd stayed maybe 45 minutes total, and as she prepared to leave, she'd done what she always did, stood on her toes and kissed his cheek in a friendly goodbye. "Tell Sophie I expect a full cookie report next time I see her," Jessica said, pulling back with a grin. "Will do. Drive safe." "Always do." Daniel had waved as she walked to her car, then headed back inside to check on the cookies, thinking nothing of the interaction beyond how nice it was to have old friends nearby. He had no idea that next door, standing at her kitchen window, Elena Wright had seen the entire thing, had seen the dark-haired woman arrive, had seen her laugh at something Daniel said, her body language comfortable and familiar, had seen them standing close on the porch, talking with the ease of people who knew each other well, had seen the kiss. And though it was just a friendly peck on the cheek, though there was nothing romantic about it whatsoever, Elena had felt something crack open in her chest. A feeling she'd been pushing down for months. A realization she'd been avoiding because acknowledging it would mean admitting she'd let herself want something she had no right to claim. Daniel Moore was not hers. They were friends. Neighbors. Nothing more, because she'd been too afraid to let it be more. Too afraid to risk the comfortable connection they'd built. Too afraid of getting hurt again after she'd worked so hard to build a life that felt safe and predictable. And now, watching him with someone else, someone who could touch him so easily, who made him smile that open, unguarded smile, Elena realized her fear had cost her something precious. She'd stepped back from the window, her hands shaking slightly, and made a decision. She needed distance. Space to get her emotions back under control. Space to stop wanting things she couldn't have. Starting tomorrow, Elena decided, she would stop coming over so often, would stop finding excuses to see him, would rebuild the boundaries she'd let dissolve over the past year. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing, even if it hurt. Daniel noticed the change immediately. The next morning, when he took the trash out at his usual time, Elena's car was already gone. That wasn't unusual. She often left early for school. But that evening, when she came home and he'd waved from where he was raking leaves in the front yard, she'd barely acknowledged him. A quick wave, eyes not quite meeting his, before she disappeared into her house. Maybe she was just tired. Bad day at work. It happened. But the next day was the same, and the day after that. By the end of the week, Daniel knew something was wrong. Elena's kitchen light no longer glowed late into the evening. No containers of food appeared on his porch. When their paths crossed, which seemed to happen less and less often, her smiles were polite but distant. The warmth that had characterized all their interactions was simply gone. "Dad, why doesn't Miss Elena come over anymore?" Sophie asked one evening, looking up from her homework with those perceptive eyes that missed nothing. "I don't know, baby. She's probably just busy with school stuff." "Did you have a fight?" "No, we didn't fight." "Then why does she look sad when she sees you?" Daniel had no answer for that. He tried giving her space, assuming she'd reach out when she was ready. But days turned into a week, then two. The silence stretched and grew heavy, filling the spaces between their houses with an awkwardness that had never existed before. He ran through every recent interaction, trying to identify what he might have done wrong. Had he said something offensive? Had he overstepped some boundary? Had his friendship become burdensome? The not knowing gnawed at him. But more than that, the absence gnawed at him. He'd gotten used to Elena's presence in his life. Used to the sound of her laughter, the way she'd listen intently when he talked about a tricky repair job, the comfortable silences that didn't need filling. He'd gotten used to looking forward to seeing her, to that lift in his chest when she knocked on his door. And now it was gone, and he didn't know why. "I'm going to check on her," he told Sophie one evening, about 3 weeks into this strange new reality. "Good," Sophie said firmly. "Tell her we miss her." Daniel had walked next door, knocked on the blue door he'd helped her repaint last spring. When Elena answered, she'd looked surprised to see him, and something in her expression, a flash of pain quickly hidden, told him this wasn't just about being busy. "Hey," he'd said softly. "I wanted to check on you. Make sure everything's okay." "Everything's fine, Daniel. Just have a lot going on with work." It was a lie. He could hear it in her voice, see it in the way she held herself slightly turned away, as if ready to close the door. "Elena." He'd stopped, unsure how to ask what he needed to ask without sounding presumptuous. "Did I do something? Because if I did, I'd really like to know. I miss—" He'd caught himself. "Sophie misses you. And I miss having you around." For a moment her facade had cracked. He'd seen something raw and vulnerable in her eyes, but then she'd pulled it back, rebuilt the walls. "You didn't do anything wrong. I just think maybe we were spending too much time together. We both have our own lives to focus on." The words had felt like a door closing, gentle but firm. "Oh, okay. If that's what you need." "It is. I'm sorry, Daniel." She'd closed the door quietly, and Daniel had stood there for a long moment, feeling a loss he couldn't quite name. When he'd come back home, Sophie had taken one look at his face and hugged him tight. "It's going to be okay, Dad." "I know, baby girl." But he wasn't sure he believed it. Life continued because life always did. The routines held: coffee at 6:15, school drop-offs and pickups, repair jobs, and late-night baking. But something fundamental had shifted. The loneliness Daniel had gotten good at ignoring had rushed back in to fill the spaces Elena had occupied, and he realized with uncomfortable clarity just how much her presence had meant. He hadn't just lost a neighbor. He'd lost someone who'd understood him without judgment. Someone whose company had made his carefully constructed life feel less like survival and more like actually living. And the worst part was not knowing why. 3 weeks turned into 4. Halloween came and went. Sophie dressed as an astronaut, Daniel handing out candy to neighborhood kids while trying not to notice that Elena's house stayed dark all evening. November arrived with cold rain that matched Daniel's mood. He'd stopped trying to reach out. Elena had made her boundaries clear, and Daniel respected that, even if he hated it. He focused on Sophie, on work, on maintaining the stability that had become his entire identity. But late at night, when the house was quiet and he stood in the kitchen measuring flour and sugar, he'd sometimes catch himself looking toward Elena's window, hoping to see her light on, hoping for some sign that maybe, eventually, they could find their way back to that easy friendship. The light stayed off, and Daniel kept baking, kept fixing things, kept moving through his routines, because that's what he did. He endured. He adapted. He protected what mattered most, even when it hurt. Even when he was starting to realize that what mattered most had somehow expanded to include a soft-spoken art teacher with kind eyes and a smile that used to make him believe in possibilities he'd given up on. But those possibilities were gone now, disappeared behind a closed blue door and a silence that Daniel had no idea how to bridge. So he didn't try. He just kept going, kept being the father Sophie needed, kept showing up for the life he'd built. And if sometimes, in quiet moments, he wondered what he'd lost and why, well, that was just another thing he'd learned to carry alone. The way he'd been carrying everything for the past 3 years. The way he'd probably keep carrying everything for years to come. Because that was his life now. And wishing it could be different wouldn't change anything, would it? December arrived with the kind of cold that settled deep into your bones and refused to leave. Boise transformed into a winter postcard. Bare trees etched against gray skies, frost coating every surface in the early morning, breath visible in small clouds that dissipated into nothing. Daniel had always liked winter, appreciated the way it forced everything to slow down, to turn inward. But this year, the cold felt different, heavier, like it was pressing down on something already bruised. Sophie had started asking fewer questions about Elena, which somehow made it worse. Kids were resilient that way. They adapted to new normals faster than adults, accepted changes that didn't make sense because their world was constantly shifting anyway. But Daniel caught her sometimes, staring out the kitchen window toward Elena's house with a confused expression that broke his heart. "She's just really busy, baby," he'd say, the lie tasting stale in his mouth. "I know, Dad," Sophie would reply, but her tone suggested she knew he was lying too. The neighborhood prepared for the holidays with its usual enthusiasm. Lights appeared on houses, inflatable snowmen sprouted in yards, wreaths hung on doors. Daniel put up their decorations the weekend after Thanksgiving, Sophie insisting on the same ornaments in the same places they'd always been, because tradition mattered when so much else felt uncertain. He strung lights along the porch railing, helped Sophie arrange the small nativity scene on the hall table, hung stockings above the fireplace they rarely used. Elena's house remained dark. No lights, no wreath, no indication that the holidays existed at all. "Maybe Miss Elena doesn't celebrate Christmas," Sophie suggested one evening, pressed against the window watching their neighbor's empty driveway. "Maybe," Daniel said, though he knew that wasn't true. Last year, Elena's house had been decorated beautifully. White lights woven through the porch columns, a simple wreath with red berries on her blue door. She'd invited them over for hot chocolate, and Sophie had been enchanted by the small tree Elena had set up in her living room, decorated entirely with handmade ornaments from her students over the years. This year, nothing. The absence felt deliberate, and that hurt more than Daniel wanted to admit. Work became his refuge. He'd taken on more projects than usual, filling his calendar until there was barely room to breathe. A complete kitchen restoration for a family in the North End, custom shelving for a home office in Eagle, refinishing an antique dining table that required painstaking attention to detail. He'd work until his hands ached, until his mind was too tired to wander toward uncomfortable questions. But exhaustion only worked for so long. "Daniel, you look like hell," Jessica said bluntly when she stopped by one afternoon in mid-December, finding him in his garage workshop surrounded by sawdust and half-finished projects. "Thanks for the honesty." "I'm serious. When's the last time you slept more than 5 hours?" "I sleep fine." "Liar." She perched on his workbench, arms crossed. "What's going on? And don't say nothing, because I've known you too long for that." Daniel set down the sanding block he'd been using, wiped his hands on his jeans. "You remember Elena? My neighbor? The art teacher? The one Sophie talks about constantly?" "Yeah, we were close, friends, and then he gestured vaguely. Stopped, cut me off completely, and I have no idea why." Jessica was quiet for a moment, studying his face with that social worker intensity that missed nothing. "When did this start?" "Late October, around Halloween." "Did something happen? An argument?" "No, that's the thing. Everything was fine, better than fine. And then overnight, it wasn't." "Had you done anything different, changed something in your routine with her?" Daniel started to say no, but then he remembered. "You came by that Tuesday afternoon when we were making cookies." "I did. So?" "So nothing. I mean, you left and everything seemed normal, but the next day Elena was different, distant." Jessica's expression shifted, something understanding and slightly exasperated crossing her features. "Daniel, when I left that day, did I kiss you goodbye?" "On the cheek, yeah, like you always do." "And where were you standing when I did that?" "The front porch. Why?" "Was Elena home?" The pieces clicked together slowly, reluctantly. "Her car was in the driveway. She could have been looking out her window. You think?" He stopped, the realization settling over him like cold water. "You think she saw and misunderstood?" "I think that's very possible. But we're just friends, you and I. There's nothing romantic. I know that. You know that. But does Elena know that?" Jessica leaned forward, her voice gentle. Think about it from her perspective. She sees you with another woman, sees physical affection. Maybe she assumes something that isn't true. Daniel felt something twist in his chest. But why would she care? We're neighbors, friends. She never gave any indication that she wanted anything else. Jessica gave him a look that was equal parts fond and frustrated. Daniel Moore, for someone so good at fixing broken things, you are spectacularly terrible at reading emotional situations. What's that supposed to mean? It means maybe she cared more than you realized. Maybe you both did. The words hung in the air between them, and Daniel felt exposed, like Jessica had just shined a light on something he'd been carefully keeping in shadow. I can't. He shook his head. My life is complicated enough. Sophie has to come first. I can't risk... Risk what? Being happy? Letting someone care about you? Jessica's voice was kind, but firm. Sophie deserves a father who shows her it's okay to open your heart, even when it's scary. Especially when it's scary. You don't understand. Then help me understand. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, the garage filled only with the sound of wind rattling the doors. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. After Rebecca died, I promised myself I'd never let Sophie go through that kind of loss again. That meant keeping our life simple, stable, no complications, no risks, no variables I couldn't control. And Elena felt like a variable? Elena felt like everything I'd convinced myself I didn't need. The admission cost him something. Having her around was easy, natural, and that scared the hell out of me because nothing that important should feel that easy. There should be warnings, safeguards, something to remind you that caring about people means risking losing them. Jessica slid off the workbench, moved to stand beside him. You know that's not how life works, right? You can't protect Sophie from loss by avoiding connection. You're just teaching her to be afraid. I'm teaching her to be careful. There's a difference between careful and closed off. She squeezed his shoulder. Talk to Elena. Actually talk to her. Clear up whatever misunderstanding happened, and then maybe consider that it's okay to want something for yourself. Something more than just surviving. After Jessica left, Daniel stood in the garage for a long time, her words circling through his mind. The rational part of him knew she was right. The fearful part, the part that still woke up sometimes reaching for someone who wasn't there anymore, wanted to retreat further into the safety of routine. But standing there, surrounded by broken things he'd promised to fix, Daniel realized he'd been doing exactly what he'd accused Elena of. Running, hiding, pretending that distance could protect him from hurt. He'd just been better at lying to himself about it. That evening, after Sophie was in bed, Daniel stood at his kitchen window looking toward Elena's house. A single lamp glowed in what he knew was her living room, a warm beacon in the dark. Before he could talk himself out of it, he pulled on his jacket and walked next door. The December air bit at his exposed skin, cold enough that his breath crystallized immediately. Elena's porch was dark, and for a moment he almost turned back, but then he raised his hand and knocked, 3 soft taps against the blue wood. Nothing. He knocked again, a little louder. This time he heard movement inside, footsteps approaching. The porch light flicked on, momentarily blinding him, and then the door opened a crack. Elena stood in the gap, wrapped in an oversized cardigan, her hair down around her shoulders. She looked tired, Daniel thought. Tired and guarded. Daniel, it's late. I know. I'm sorry. Can we talk, please? I don't think that's a good idea. Elena. He put his hand on the door, not pushing, just a gentle pressure. Something happened. Something changed between us, and I need to understand what it was. Did I do something wrong? Say something that hurt you? She looked away, jaw tight. You didn't do anything wrong. Then why does it feel like I lost my best friend? The words came out more raw than he'd intended, and he saw them land, saw Elena flinch slightly. We were never... She stopped, started again. We were neighbors who got too comfortable. That's all. That's bullshit, and you know it. Her eyes snapped back to his, surprised. Daniel rarely cursed, rarely let his frustration show like this. You don't get to decide what we were, he continued, voice low but intense. We were friends. Real friends. You were someone I trusted, someone I looked forward to seeing every day, someone who made my life better just by being in it. And then you just vanished, cut me off without explanation. And I've spent 6 weeks trying to figure out what I did to deserve that. You didn't deserve anything, Elena said, and now there was heat in her voice too. You were perfect, okay? You are perfect. Perfect father, perfect neighbor, perfect friend. That's the problem. I don't understand. Of course you don't. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're so focused on being what Sophie needs that you don't even see. She cut herself off, shook her head. I can't do this right now. Can't do what? Talk to me? Be honest about whatever's actually going on here? I can't stand here and pretend that watching you with her didn't hurt. The words burst out of Elena like they'd been trapped too long. I can't pretend I'm fine seeing you move on with someone else when I've spent months trying not to feel. She stopped abruptly, hand over her mouth like she could take the words back. Daniel's heart was pounding. With who? Move on with who? The woman who came to visit, the one you kissed. Jessica? He was genuinely confused now. Elena, Jessica is an old friend, that's all. We went to college together. She's like a sister to me. Elena's expression flickered, doubt, hope, fear chasing across her features. You kissed her. She kissed my cheek, a friendly goodbye, that's all it was. Oh. The word came out small, deflated. Is that why you've been avoiding me? You thought I was dating someone? Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking vulnerable in a way Daniel had never seen. I thought, when I saw you together, you looked so happy, so easy with each other. And I realized I had no right to be upset about it, because we were just neighbors, just friends. Except somewhere along the way, I'd started wanting more than that, and seeing you with her made me realize how stupid I'd been, how I'd let myself care about someone who was never really available. The confession hung in the cold air between them, and Daniel felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Never available? He repeated. Elena, I'm not. There's no one. There hasn't been anyone since Rebecca. That's not what I meant. She looked at him, really looked at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. You're not available because you're a father first, because your whole life revolves around Sophie, exactly as it should, and I can't compete with that. Wouldn't want to, but it means there's no room for anything else, for anyone else. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd been holding closed for years. You think I don't have room in my life for you? I think you have your priorities, and they're the right priorities. I'm not asking you to change them. Then what are you asking? Nothing. The word came out sharp, frustrated. I'm not asking for anything, Daniel. I'm trying to protect both of us from a situation that can't work. Why can't it work? Because, her voice broke slightly, because I've already started caring too much. Because seeing you every day, being close to you, spending time with Sophie, it made me want things I'd convinced myself I didn't need anymore. And then I saw you with that woman, and I realized I'd set myself up to get hurt. So I pulled back, created distance. It was the smart thing to do. The smart thing, Daniel repeated slowly, or the scared thing? Elena's breath hitched. Don't. Don't what? Point out that we're both doing the same thing, running away from something because we're afraid of getting hurt? I'm not running. I'm being realistic. You're being terrified, just like me. He took a step closer, and Elena didn't move away. You want to know the truth? I've been scared of you since the day we met. Scared of how easy you were to talk to, how natural it felt having you around, how much Sophie loved you, how much He stopped, made himself say it. How much I looked forward to seeing you every single day. That terrified me, Elena, because caring about someone means risking losing them, and I've already lost someone I loved. I didn't think I could survive that again. So you kept your distance, Elena said softly. So I kept my distance, told myself we were just friends, just neighbors, convinced myself that I was content with the life I'd built, that I didn't need anything more. He laughed quietly. And then you disappeared, and I realized I'd been lying to myself, because the past 6 weeks have been miserable, Not because my routine changed or because Sophie misses you, though she does, but because I miss you. Because coming home doesn't feel the same when you're not there. Because late night baking isn't as satisfying when I can't bring you cookies afterward. Because I got used to having you in my life, and losing that has felt like... He couldn't finish the sentence. Like losing something important, Elena finished quietly. Yeah. They stood there on her porch, the winter night cold around them, and Daniel could see Elena processing everything he'd just said. He'd laid himself bare in a way he hadn't done since Rebecca died, and now all he could do was wait. I don't know how to do this, Elena finally said. How to be part of your life without disrupting Sophie's stability, without asking for more than you can give. What if I want to give more? Daniel, I'm not saying I have all the answers. I'm not saying it won't be complicated or scary. But I'm tired of pretending that keeping everyone at arm's length is the same thing as protecting them. Jessica said something today. She said, I'm teaching Sophie to be afraid instead of teaching her to be brave. And she was right. Jessica is the woman who visited? Yeah, and she'll be thrilled to know her random act of friendly affection caused all this drama. He smiled slightly. She's the one who made me realize what was probably going on, why you pulled away. I feel so stupid, Elena said, closing her eyes. I saw her kiss you and just assumed, didn't even ask, just ran away. We both ran away. From different things, maybe, but we both did it. So what now? It was the question Daniel had been asking himself since Jessica left his garage. What now? How did you move forward when you'd spent years building walls specifically designed to keep this from happening? Now we try being honest, he said, really honest, about what we want, what we're afraid of, what we need. Okay. Elena took a breath. I'll start. I want to be part of your life, both your lives, not as just a neighbor or a friend, but as someone who cares about you, about Sophie, who wants to build something real, even if it's scary and complicated. The words settled over Daniel like a warm blanket, chasing away some of the cold that had taken root over the past 6 weeks. I want that too, he admitted. But I need you to understand, Sophie comes first, always. That's not negotiable. I wouldn't expect anything else. I don't want to come between you and your daughter, Daniel. I want to, if she's okay with it, I want to be part of what you're building together. She asks about you constantly, wants to know when you're coming back. I miss her too. Elena's voice was thick with emotion. I miss both of you. These past weeks have been... She shook her head. I thought distance would make it easier, would help me get over whatever feelings I'd developed, but it just made everything worse. Same, Daniel said quietly. They looked at each other and Daniel saw his own fear reflected back at him, but he also saw hope, possibility, the chance to build something neither of them had thought they were ready for. Can I... He gestured toward the door. Can I come in? Actually talk instead of standing out here freezing? Elena hesitated for just a moment, then stepped back, opening the door wider. Yes, come in. Her living room was exactly as he remembered. Comfortable furniture and soft colors, artwork on the walls that she'd either created or collected, bookshelves stuffed with novels and art books. But it felt colder than before, like the house had been holding its breath for weeks. They settled on her couch, maintaining a careful distance that felt both awkward and necessary. I don't know where to start, Elena admitted. Tell me why you're scared, Daniel said. Really scared. Not just the surface stuff. She pulled her cardigan tighter around herself, gathering courage. I was engaged once, 5 years ago. His name was Marcus, and I really thought we were building a life together. But then his ex-girlfriend came back into the picture, and it turned out he'd never really let her go. The relationship ended, and I moved here to start over, promised myself I'd be more careful, more guarded. And then I showed up next door with my complicated single dad life. And then you showed up, she agreed, a small smile touching her lips. You were safe at first, just a neighbor, someone to trade small talk with, but then you started bringing me cookies at midnight and fixing things around my house without being asked and looking at me with those eyes that actually see people. And I realized I was in trouble. Trouble how? The kind where I started planning my evenings around when you'd be home from work, where I'd bake things just so I'd have an excuse to come over, where I'd lie awake thinking about what it would be like if... She stopped, cheeks flushing slightly. If we were more than friends. Daniel's heart was racing. I did the same thing, the evening yard work, the better coffee, learning your schedule so I could accidentally be outside when you got home. We're both idiots. Complete idiots, he agreed. But we're honest idiots now. That's progress. Elena laughed, and the sound eased some of the tension in the room. What are you afraid of? Besides the obvious losing someone you love thing. That I won't be enough, Daniel said, the words coming easier now. That I'll disappoint you because I can't give you the uncomplicated relationship you deserve. That Sophie will get attached and then somehow things will fall apart, and she'll lose another person she cares about. That I'm being selfish even wanting this when my life should be entirely focused on being her father. You're allowed to want things for yourself. In theory, sure. In practice? He shook his head. I've spent 3 years building a life where Sophie's needs are the only needs that matter, where everything else is just maintenance. It worked. It kept us stable, but it also meant not letting anyone get close enough to disrupt that stability. And I disrupted it anyway. You made me realize the stability I'd built was really just isolation with better lighting. They sat with that for a moment, the truth of it settling between them. I need you to know something, Elena said carefully. I care about Sophie. Genuinely. Not as a means to be with you, but because she's an amazing kid. She's creative and kind and so much braver than she realizes. Whatever happens between us, I don't want to hurt her. I know. I've watched you with her. You're never fake, never performing. You actually listen to her stories about school and her theories about why cats hate water. You treat her like a real person, not just someone's cute kid. She is a real person, a wonderful one. Yeah. Daniel felt emotion tightening his throat. She is. So where does that leave us? It was the practical question, the one that required actual decisions instead of just emotional confessions. I think, Daniel said slowly, we take this slow, really slow. We start spending time together again, but we're honest about what it is. We don't hide it from Sophie, but we also don't put pressure on any of us to figure out exactly what we're building. Slow and honest, Elena repeated. I can do that. And we communicate. Actually communicate. If something's bothering you, you tell me. If I'm being an idiot, you call me on it. No more running away without explanation. That goes both ways. If you start pulling back out of fear, I need you to tell me instead of just disappearing into your workshop. Deal. Daniel held out his hand, a formal gesture that felt both ridiculous and necessary. Elena took it, her skin warm against his cold palm. Instead of shaking, she just held on. I really missed you, she said quietly. I really missed you too. They sat there, hands clasped, and Daniel felt something shift. Not everything, not all at once, but enough to know that the past 6 weeks of misery had maybe served a purpose, had forced them both to confront what they'd been avoiding. It's late, Elena finally said, though she didn't let go of his hand. You should probably get back. Sophie might wake up. Yeah. Daniel stood reluctantly, and Elena rose with him. They walked to the door together, still holding hands. At the threshold, Elena paused. Daniel, thank you for not giving up, for coming over here and making me actually talk about this. Thank you for being honest, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard, she corrected. He wanted to kiss her. The impulse was sudden and strong, and for a moment he almost did. But something held him back. The awareness that they'd both agreed to go slow, that rushing things now would be repeating old patterns instead of building new ones. So instead he squeezed her hand once more and let go. Tomorrow, he said. Come over for dinner. Sophie will lose her mind. Tomorrow, Elena agreed, smiling. I'll bring dessert. I thought I was the baker in this relationship. The word relationship hung in the air again, but this time it didn't feel dangerous. It felt like possibility. Daniel walked home through the cold December night, and for the first time in 6 weeks, the darkness didn't feel quite so heavy. Elena's porch light stayed on as he crossed between their houses, a small beacon saying she was there, that she wasn't running anymore. Neither was he. Inside his house, Daniel checked on Sophie, still sleeping peacefully, her room cluttered with art supplies and books, and then stood in his kitchen, looking back toward Elena's window. The light was still on. He pulled out his phone and sent a text. "Thank you for letting me in." 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then, "Thank you for knocking." Daniel smiled and set his phone down, feeling lighter than he had in months. There was still fear there, still uncertainty about how to navigate this new territory, but there was also hope. The kind of hope he'd convinced himself he didn't need anymore. Tomorrow, Elena would come to dinner. Sophie would be thrilled. They'd eat together and talk and start building whatever this was going to become. Slowly. Honestly. With full awareness that it might be scary and complicated and require constant navigation, but also with the knowledge that some things were worth the risk. Some people were worth letting in. Even when, especially when, it meant admitting you couldn't keep everyone at safe distances forever. Daniel moved through the house, turning off lights, preparing for bed. Outside, snow had started to fall, soft flakes drifting past the windows. The neighborhood settled into its nighttime quiet, houses dark except for the occasional string of holiday lights. And next door, in the yellow cottage with the blue door, Elena's light finally went out. But the warmth that had been missing for 6 weeks? That, Daniel thought as he climbed the stairs to bed, was just beginning to come back. The snow continued falling through the night, blanketing Boise in white that caught the streetlights and glowed softly in the darkness. Daniel lay awake longer than usual, his mind replaying the conversation with Elena, examining each word, each confession, each moment of vulnerability they'd both offered. The fear was still there. He'd be lying to himself if he pretended otherwise, but it felt different now, less like a wall and more like something he could acknowledge and move through. When morning came, Sophie noticed the change immediately. "You look happy," she observed over breakfast, studying him with those perceptive eyes that missed nothing. "I am happy," Daniel admitted, pouring her orange juice. "Why?" "Miss Elena is coming to dinner tonight." Sophie's face lit up like someone had flipped a switch. "Really? She's coming back?" "She never left, baby. She just needed some space for a while. But yeah, she's coming over tonight. Can we make her favorite cookies, the lemon ones with the glaze?" Daniel smiled, his heart full. "I think that's a perfect idea." They spent the morning in comfortable routine, school drop-off, a few hours working on the kitchen restoration project, picking Sophie up at 3:15. But the afternoon was different. Sophie insisted on helping prepare for Elena's visit, which meant the house got a 7-year-old's version of deep cleaning. Toys corralled into bins, books straightened on shelves, her latest drawings displayed prominently on the refrigerator. "We should make something special for dinner," Sophie declared, hands on her hips in a pose that reminded Daniel so much of Rebecca it made his chest ache. "Not just regular food, special food." "What did you have in mind?" "Homemade pizza. We can make the dough and everything, and Miss Elena can put on her own toppings." It was perfect. Interactive, casual, exactly the kind of low-pressure meal that would let them all just be together without the weight of formal expectations. They started the dough around 4, Sophie standing on her step stool to help measure flour and yeast. The kitchen filled with the yeasty smell of rising dough, and Daniel found himself relaxing into the familiar rhythm of cooking, of creating something with his hands. At 5:30 there was a knock on the door. Sophie scrambled down from her stool, nearly tripping over her own feet in her rush to answer. Daniel followed more slowly, wiping flour from his hands, his heart rate picking up in a way that felt both terrifying and right. Elena stood on the porch holding a glass dish covered with foil, snowflakes caught in her dark hair, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She was wearing jeans and a soft green sweater, and when she saw Sophie, her whole face softened. "Miss Elena." Sophie launched herself forward, wrapping her arms around Elena's waist. Elena managed to hold onto the dish while hugging Sophie back with one arm, her eyes meeting Daniel's over his daughter's head. There was emotion there, relief, happiness, something deeper that made Daniel's breath catch. "I missed you so much," Sophie said, muffled against Elena's sweater. "I missed you too, sweetheart. So much. Why did you stop coming over? Dad said you needed space, but I don't understand what that means." Elena knelt down, setting the dish aside so she could look at Sophie properly. "Sometimes grown-ups get confused about their feelings, and we need time to figure things out. I wasn't upset with you or your dad. I just needed to think about some things, but I'm sorry I stayed away so long. That wasn't fair to you. Are you going to stay away again? No, Elena said firmly, glancing up at Daniel. I'm not going to do that again. I promise. Sophie seemed satisfied with this answer. She grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her inside. We're making homemade pizza. You can put whatever toppings you want on yours. Even pineapple if you want, even though Dad says that's controversial. Pineapple on pizza is controversial, Daniel interjected, closing the door behind them. I happen to like pineapple on pizza, Elena said, her eyes dancing with amusement. Of course you do, Daniel said, but he was smiling. The evening unfolded with an ease that felt miraculous after 6 weeks of absence. They rolled out pizza dough together, Sophie insisting on making her own small personal pizza shaped like a heart. Elena and Daniel worked side by side at the counter, their hands occasionally brushing as they passed the sauce or cheese, small touches that sent warmth through Daniel's entire body. So Dad says you thought he had a girlfriend, Sophie announced suddenly, spooning sauce onto her dough. Daniel nearly dropped the cheese grater. Sophie? What? You did say that last night when you were on the phone with Jessica. You were supposed to be asleep. I was getting water. Sophie looked between them with innocent curiosity. Did you really think that? Elena's cheeks flushed, but she didn't deflect. I did. I saw your dad with a friend of his, and I made a wrong assumption. That was my mistake. But he doesn't have a girlfriend. Just you. Sophie, Daniel's face was burning now. Well, you don't, Sophie said matter-of-factly. And Miss Elena is here for dinner, which is basically what people do when they like each other. Uncle Marcus told me that when he started dating Aunt Jennifer. They had dinner lots of times before they got married. Elena was trying very hard not to laugh. Daniel could tell. He met her eyes over Sophie's head and saw his own embarrassment reflected back, mixed with affection. Your daughter is very observant, Elena said quietly. Too observant, Daniel muttered, but there was no real heat in it. Dinner was chaotic in the best way. Sophie dominated the conversation, telling Elena everything she'd done in the past 6 weeks, a school art project about winter animals, a book she'd read 3 times, a complicated theory about why her teacher always wore purple on Wednesdays. Elena listened with genuine attention, asked follow-up questions, and treated every detail like it mattered. Daniel watched them together and felt something settle in his chest. This was what he'd been afraid of. Sophie getting attached, caring about someone who might leave. But watching them now, seeing Sophie's pure joy at having Elena back, he realized his fear had been doing exactly what Jessica said. It had been teaching his daughter to protect herself instead of teaching her to be brave enough to love people. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Sophie insisted on showing Elena her latest drawings, spreading them across the coffee table while explaining the story behind each one. Daniel cleaned up the kitchen, half listening to their conversation, letting the sound of Sophie's excited chatter and Elena's warm responses wash over him. Dad, come look at this one. He joined them in the living room, settling on the floor beside Elena, while Sophie held up a drawing of 3 figures, a tall one, a small one, and a medium one with dark hair. That's us, Sophie explained. You, me, and Miss Elena. We're baking cookies. Daniel's throat tightened. The drawing was simple, the way 7-year-old art always was, but the feeling behind it was clear. The 3 figures stood close together, smiling, surrounded by hearts and stars. It's beautiful, Sophie, Elena said softly. You can have it if you want, to put on your refrigerator. I would love that, thank you. Sophie beamed, then yawned hugely. I'm tired. Bedtime, kiddo, Daniel said. Go brush your teeth. Can Miss Elena tuck me in? Daniel glanced at Elena, giving her an out if she needed one. But Elena was already nodding. I'd love to, if that's okay with your dad. Of course it's okay. While Sophie got ready for bed, Daniel and Elena stood in the quiet living room, the drawing still spread on the coffee table. She drew you into our family, Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. I see that. Does that scare you? Elena turned to face him fully. Terrifies me. But also, it feels right. She's an incredible kid, Daniel. She is, and she's already attached to you, so that's what I was afraid of. That if things between us didn't work out, then we make sure they work out, Elena interrupted. Not by being reckless or rushing, but by being intentional. By choosing each other every day and being honest when things are hard. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it might be worth the complexity. Before Daniel could respond, Sophie called from upstairs. Miss Elena, I'm ready. Elena touched his hand briefly, then headed upstairs. Daniel followed quietly, standing in the hallway while Elena sat on the edge of Sophie's bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. Thank you for having me over tonight, Elena said. You're welcome. Will you come back soon? Very soon. Maybe this weekend we could do something together? All three of us? Like what? I don't know. What do you like to do? Sophie thought about this seriously. I like making things, and going to the library, and hot chocolate. Those all sound perfect to me. Miss Elena? Sophie's voice got quieter. Are you and Dad going to be boyfriend and girlfriend? From the hallway, Daniel tensed, waiting to see how Elena would handle this. Elena was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Your dad and I care about each other very much. We're still figuring out exactly what that means. But whatever happens, I promise I'll always be honest with you. And I'll always care about you, no matter what, okay? Okay. Sophie seemed satisfied with this answer. I think you should be boyfriend and girlfriend. You make Dad smile with his eyes. Elena laughed softly. He makes me smile with my eyes, too. Good. Then you should definitely be together. After Sophie was asleep, Daniel and Elena returned downstairs. The house had settled into its nighttime quiet, just the soft hum of the heater and the occasional creak of old wood settling. They sat on the couch, leaving space between them that felt charged with possibility. She's pretty direct, Elena said. Always has been. Rebecca used to say Sophie got all my stubbornness and none of my filter. It was the first time Daniel had mentioned Rebecca directly to Elena, and he felt her attention shift, become more focused. Tell me about her, Elena said gently. If you want to. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, gathering the words. She was light. That's the word that always comes to mind. She found joy in everything, even mundane things. Grocery shopping was an adventure. Laundry was an opportunity to dance while folding clothes. She made the world feel bigger and brighter just by being in it. She sounds wonderful. She was. And when she died, his voice cracked slightly. The world got very small, very dark. All I could do was focus on Sophie, on making sure she felt safe and loved and okay. Everything else just stopped mattering. Elena reached over and took his hand, and Daniel held on like an anchor. For 3 years, that was enough. Taking care of Sophie, building routines, keeping everything stable. I told myself I was content, that this was my life now, and it was a good life, and I didn't need anything else. He looked at Elena. And then you moved in next door and started bringing me banana bread and letting me fix your gate. And suddenly I realized I'd been lying to myself, that I'd confused surviving with living. Daniel, let me finish, please. He needed to get this out. When I saw you pull away, when I thought I'd lost your friendship, it woke something up. Made me realize that I'd been using Sophie as an excuse to not risk my heart again. And that wasn't fair to her or to me or to the possibility of something more. What are you saying? I'm saying I care about you. More than I've let myself care about anyone in 3 years. I'm saying that watching you with Sophie tonight, seeing how natural and right it felt having you here, it made me realize this is what I want. Not just friendship. Not just neighborly companionship. Something real. Something that might be complicated and scary, but also... He struggled for the words. Also worth it, Elena finished. Yeah, also worth it. Elena shifted closer, closing the space between them. I care about you too, both of you. And I know it's fast, I know we should be taking this slow like we said, but Daniel, I need you to know that I'm all in, not halfway, not with reservations. I want this. I want you. I want to be part of what you're building here. Even though it comes with a 7-year-old who has strong opinions about pizza toppings and will absolutely grill you about your intentions. Especially because of that. They looked at each other, and Daniel saw his own longing reflected in Elena's eyes. The space between them felt electric, charged with everything they'd both been holding back. "Can I kiss you?" Daniel asked, his voice rough. "I thought you'd never ask." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but Elena met him halfway. Their lips touched softly at first, tentative, both of them hyper-aware that they were crossing a line they couldn't uncross. But then Elena's hand came up to cup his face, and Daniel's arms went around her waist, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Elena rested her forehead against his. "Wow," she whispered. "Yeah," Daniel agreed. "Wow." They sat like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other, and Daniel felt the fear that had been his constant companion for 3 years finally start to loosen its grip. It didn't disappear entirely. He wasn't sure it ever would, but it became manageable, became something he could acknowledge and move forward with anyway. "I should probably go," Elena said eventually, though she made no move to pull away. "It's late, and we both have work tomorrow." "I know, but I don't want you to." "I don't want to either." She pulled back enough to look at him. "But we're doing this right, remember? Slow and intentional." "Slow and intentional," Daniel repeated, "even though every part of me wants to ask you to stay. Even though every part of me wants to say yes." She stood, pulling him up with her. "But there will be other nights. We have time now." They walked to the door together, reluctant to let go of each other's hands. "Tomorrow?" Daniel asked. "Tomorrow. I'll bring coffee in the morning if you want, before work." "I would love that." At the door, Elena turned back, her hand on the frame. "Daniel, thank you for tonight, for being brave enough to try this." "Thank you for giving me a reason to be brave." She kissed him once more, soft and sweet, then stepped out into the cold night. Daniel watched from the doorway as she crossed to her house, waited until her door opened and she turned to wave before closing his own door. The house felt different now, fuller somehow, even though it was just him again. The drawing Sophie had made still sat on the coffee table, 3 figures baking together, surrounded by hearts. Daniel picked it up, studying the simple lines, the way Sophie had placed Elena right between him and her, part of their unit. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "That was perfect. Sleep well." He responded, "You too. See you in the morning." Then he moved through the house, turning off lights, checking locks, all the nighttime routines he'd done 1,000 times before. But tonight they felt different. Tonight they felt like preparation rather than defense, like he was securing a home that was opening up rather than closing in. In his bedroom, Daniel stood at the window looking toward Elena's house. Her light was on, a warm glow against the snowy darkness, and as he watched, her silhouette appeared in the window. She waved, just a small gesture, and Daniel waved back. 2 people, in separate houses, acknowledging the space between them, while also acknowledging that the space was getting smaller, that they were choosing to build a bridge across it, carefully and honestly, and with full awareness of what they were risking. Daniel climbed into bed, and for the first time in 6 weeks, sleep came easily. His dreams were gentle, images of Sophie laughing, of Elena's hand in his, of 3 people building something together with patience and care. The next morning started the same as always, coffee at 6:15, Sophie padding downstairs in her oversized shirt, breakfast in the faded cartoon bowl. But at 6:45 there was a soft knock on the door. Elena stood on the porch with 2 travel mugs of coffee and a smile that made Daniel's heart skip. "Morning," she said. "Morning." He stepped aside to let her in, and Sophie looked up from her cereal with delight. "Miss Elena, you came back." "I brought coffee for your dad and hot chocolate for you. Is that okay?" That's perfect. And it was, Daniel thought, not in a dramatic, life-changing way, but in the quiet, steady way that actually mattered. Elena sitting at their table, Sophie chattering about the school day ahead, the 3 of them existing in the same space with an ease that suggested this was just the beginning. When it was time for Daniel to take Sophie to school, Elena walked them to the door. "See you tonight?" Daniel asked quietly, while Sophie put on her backpack. "See you tonight. I'll bring dinner this time. Give you a break from cooking." "You don't have to." "I want to." She squeezed his hand. "This is what we do now, right? Take care of each other?" "Yeah," Daniel said, warmth spreading through his chest. That's what we do. Sophie hugged Elena goodbye, already a routine forming, and then they were out the door into the cold morning. As Daniel backed out of the driveway, he could see Elena standing in his doorway, waving. "Dad," Sophie said from the back seat. "Yeah, baby?" "I'm really glad Miss Elena came back." "Me too, Sophie. Me too." The day passed in its usual rhythm: work, school pickup, homework time. But underneath the routine was a current of anticipation. Elena was coming to dinner. Elena was part of their lives now, officially, intentionally. The thought made Danielle nervous and excited in equal measure. She arrived at 6 with Chinese takeout and spring rolls, and they ate at the kitchen table while Sophie talked about her art class, and Elena shared a story about a student who'd painted their entire hand blue and then high-fived everything in sight. After dinner, while Daniel loaded the dishwasher, Elena and Sophie worked on a drawing together at the coffee table. He could hear them talking, Sophie explaining her vision, Elena asking questions and offering gentle suggestions. It was domestic and comfortable, and everything Daniel had convinced himself he couldn't have again. "Dad, look what we made!" Sophie held up a drawing of a house with 3 people visible through the windows. "That's beautiful, baby." "It's our house, see? You're in the kitchen, I'm in my room, and Miss Elena is—" She paused, suddenly uncertain. Where should Miss Elena be? Elena looked at Daniel, a question in her eyes. Where did she belong in this picture they were creating? "How about in the living room?" Daniel suggested gently. "That's where we all hang out together." "Perfect." Sophie added Elena's figure to the living room, then drew a heart above the house. "There. Now it's done." That night, after Sophie was in bed, Daniel and Elena stood on his front porch, the December cold biting, but neither of them wanting to say goodbye yet. "This is becoming a habit," Elena said, her breath visible in the air. "A good habit," Daniel countered. "The best habit." She looked up at him, and in the porch light he could see snowflakes caught in her hair again. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and realize I imagined all of this. That we didn't actually—" He kissed her, cutting off the doubt. When they parted, both were smiling. "Not imagining it," Daniel said. "This is real." "Real," Elena repeated, like she was testing the word. "We're really doing this. We're really doing this, slowly, carefully, but yes." "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Me too. But I'm also—" He searched for the right word. "Happy. Really happy. For the first time in a long time." "Me too," Elena whispered. She pulled him close, resting her head against his chest, and they stood like that for a long moment, just breathing together in the cold night. When Elena finally pulled away, her eyes were bright. "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow. Always tomorrow." He watched her walk home, watched her light come on, watched until she appeared in her window to wave goodnight. Then he went inside, checked on Sophie, fast asleep, clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 2, and stood in his quiet house, letting the reality of what was happening settle over him. He'd been so afraid of this, afraid of caring, afraid of risking, afraid of disrupting the careful stability he'd built. But standing here now, his lips still tingling from Elena's kiss, his heart full of possibility, Daniel realized something crucial. The stability he'd created wasn't really stability at all. It was stagnation dressed up as safety. Real stability, the kind that could weather storms and changes and uncertainty, came from connection, not isolation. From being brave enough to let people in, even when it scared you. Especially when it scared you. Sophie had been right all along. He did smile differently when Elena was around, because Elena made him feel like the world had color again, like tomorrow might hold something beautiful instead of just being another day to get through. That night, Daniel slept better than he had in years, and when he woke at 6:15 to start another day, the first thing he thought about wasn't the routines he needed to maintain or the walls he needed to keep in place. He thought about Elena, about Sophie's joy at having her back, about the possibility of building something that was messy and complicated and absolutely worth every risk. And he smiled. Not just his regular smile, but the kind that reached his eyes. The kind that meant he was finally truly living again. The weeks that followed fell into a new rhythm, one that felt both natural and revolutionary. Elena became a constant presence in their lives, but not in a way that disrupted the foundation Daniel had built. Instead, she wove herself into the existing fabric, adding color and texture without unraveling what was already there. She learned their routines, that Sophie liked her toast cut diagonally, that Daniel needed his first coffee black and his second with cream, that Tuesday nights were reserved for the library and Thursdays for Sophie's art class. She didn't try to change these things, she just learned to move within them, finding her own place in the patterns. On a Saturday morning in mid-December, Daniel woke to find a text from Elena sent at 6 a.m. "Come look outside." He padded to the window and pulled back the curtain. The world had transformed overnight, at least 6 inches of fresh snow blanketing everything, still falling in thick flakes that caught the early morning light. And there, in the space between their houses, Elena stood in her pajamas and winter coat, her face tilted toward the sky, arms spread wide like she was trying to catch every flake. Daniel smiled and grabbed his own coat, careful not to wake Sophie as he slipped outside. "You're crazy," he said, coming to stand beside her. His breath came out in white clouds. "Maybe," Elena said, still looking up, "but when's the last time you just stood in falling snow and appreciated how beautiful it is?" Daniel thought about this. "Honestly, I can't remember." Exactly. We get so busy managing life that we forget to actually experience it. She was right. How many mornings had he looked out at snow and thought only about the inconvenience, shoveling the driveway, slippery roads, wet boots tracking through the house? When had he stopped seeing the magic in it? Elena reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. They stood there in the quiet dawn, snow accumulating on their shoulders and hair, and Daniel felt something shift. This was what he'd been missing, not just companionship or romance, but someone who reminded him to pause, to notice, to find wonder in ordinary moments. "Dad! Miss Elena!" Sophie's face appeared in the upstairs window, pressed against the glass. "Can I come out too?" "Bundle up," Daniel called back. Minutes later, Sophie burst through the door in her warmest coat, boots unlaced, hat askew. She immediately flopped backward into the snow, making a snow angel with the serious concentration she brought to all her creative endeavors. "Help me make a snowman," she demanded. "A big one. The biggest one on the street." They spent the next hour rolling massive snowballs, stacking them into a lumpy but charming snowman that Sophie insisted needed a scarf, buttons, and a carrot nose. Elena ran back to her house and returned with supplies. An old scarf in cheerful red, coal from her fireplace for eyes, and yes, a carrot that Sophie positioned with utmost care. "He needs a name," Sophie announced, stepping back to admire their work. "What about Frosty?" Daniel suggested. "Too boring. What about—" Sophie paused dramatically. "What about Reginald?" Elena burst out laughing. "Reginald? He looks like a Reginald," Sophie said with complete seriousness. "Then Reginald it is," Daniel agreed, catching Elena's eye. She was grinning, snowflakes caught in her eyelashes, her cheeks flushed with cold, and Daniel thought she'd never looked more beautiful. They made hot chocolate after. All three of them crowded into Daniel's kitchen, wet clothes dripping on the floor mat. Sophie chattered about Reginald's backstory. Apparently he was a distinguished gentleman snowman who'd traveled the world. While Elena helped Daniel heat milk on the stove, their movements synchronized in a way that came from growing familiarity. "You're good at this," Daniel said quietly, while Sophie rummaged in the pantry for marshmallows. "At making hot chocolate?" "At being here. With us. It doesn't feel forced or awkward." Elena's expression softened. "It doesn't feel forced to me either. It feels—" She paused, searching for words. "It feels like where I'm supposed to be." Before Daniel could respond, Sophie returned triumphant with a bag of marshmallows. "Found them. Can I have extra in mine?" "You can have exactly the right amount," Daniel said, which made Sophie roll her eyes but smile. They drank their hot chocolate in the living room, Sophie nestled between them on the couch, and Daniel realized this was exactly what he'd been so afraid of. Not the relationship itself, but this. The way his heart expanded to include Elena in moments that used to be just his and Sophie's. The way it felt natural rather than intrusive. The way Sophie leaned against Elena like she belonged there. If this fell apart, if Elena left, Sophie would be hurt. That was the risk Daniel had been trying to avoid. But looking at his daughter now, watching her show Elena pictures in one of her favorite books, He understood something crucial. Sophie was already attached, had been from the first batch of cookies Elena brought over, from the first time Elena sat on the floor and drew with her, really listened to her. Pulling away now wouldn't protect Sophie from hurt. It would just guarantee it. The only way forward was through. Together. That afternoon, after Sophie went to a birthday party at a friend's house, Daniel and Elena found themselves alone for the first time in days. They sat in Elena's living room. Warmer than his, she kept the heat higher, with mugs of tea and the comfortable silence of people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said eventually. "Always." "What does Sophie know about Rebecca? About what happened?" Daniel had known this conversation would come eventually. He took a breath, gathering his thoughts. "She knows her mom died in a car accident, that it wasn't anyone's fault, just wrong place, wrong time. She knows Rebecca loved her more than anything. Beyond that," he shrugged. "She was so young when it happened. Most of what she knows comes from stories I've told her, photos I've shown her." "Does she ask about her?" "Less and less, which breaks my heart a little, but I also know it's normal. Her memories are fading. Sometimes she'll say something like, 'I think Mom used to sing this song,' or 'Was Mom the one who liked strawberries?' And I can tell she's not sure anymore what she actually remembers versus what I've told her." Elena reached over and took his hand. "That must be hard. For both of you." "It is, but I've tried to keep Rebecca present without making her into some untouchable saint. Sophie needs to know her mother was a real person, flawed and funny and sometimes forgetful and absolutely full of love. Not a perfect angel, just," his voice caught, "just someone who would have done anything for her." "She sounds amazing." "She was, and for a long time I thought—" Daniel stopped, then made himself continue. This was Elena. She deserved his honesty. "I thought letting anyone else into our lives would somehow diminish Rebecca's memory, like I'd be replacing her or betraying what we had. And now? Now I'm starting to understand that love doesn't work that way. That making room for you doesn't mean pushing Rebecca out. They're different things, different kinds of love for different times in my life." Elena was quiet for a moment, processing this. "I don't want to replace her. I could never replace her. She's Sophie's mother, and she'll always be part of your story." "I know, and the fact that you understand that you're not threatened by her memory or trying to erase her, that means everything." They sat with that for a while, the weight of what they were building settling between them. This wasn't just a casual relationship, Daniel realized. They were creating something that would affect Sophie, that would reshape the family structure he'd built. That required intention and care and constant communication. "Tell me about your fears," Elena said. "The real ones, not just the surface stuff." Daniel thought about deflecting, but what was the point? If they were doing this, really doing this, she needed to see all of him. "I'm afraid I'll screw this up, that I'll hurt you by prioritizing Sophie, or hurt Sophie by being distracted by you. I'm afraid you'll realize that dating a single parent is harder than you thought and decide it's not worth it. I'm afraid—" He took a shaky breath. "I'm afraid I'll lose you, and it'll wreck me even worse than losing Rebecca did, because this time I saw it coming and chose it anyway." "Daniel?" Elena shifted closer, her hand cupping his face. "Listen to me. I'm not going anywhere. Yes, this is complicated. Yes, there will be hard days. But I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you and Sophie and this beautiful, messy, complicated life you're letting me into." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've spent the last year watching you be a father, watching you show up for Sophie every single day, even when you're exhausted, watching you bake at midnight because it's the only time you can process your emotions, watching you fix broken things with patience and care. And somewhere in all of that, I fell completely in love with you." The words hung in the air, massive and undeniable. "You—" Daniel's voice failed him. "You love me?" "I love you," Elena repeated, and there were tears in her eyes now. "I've probably loved you for months, but I was too scared to admit it. Too scared you didn't feel the same way, that I was just a convenient neighbor. But I'm done being scared. Life's too short, and you're too important." Daniel kissed her then, pouring 3 years of loneliness and fear and desperate hope into it. When they broke apart, both were crying. I love you too, he said, the words coming easier than he'd expected. I think I have for a while. I just didn't know how to let myself feel it. And now? Now I'm letting myself feel everything, all of it, even the scary parts. They held each other on Elena's couch while snow continued falling outside, and Daniel felt the last of his carefully constructed walls crumble. This was vulnerability. This was risk. This was opening his heart to someone knowing full well that love meant the possibility of loss. But it also meant the certainty of joy, of connection, of building something beautiful enough to be worth protecting. When Daniel picked Sophie up from the birthday party later that afternoon, she was vibrating with sugar and excitement. We had cake and played games, and Emma's mom let us make our own pizzas. She barely paused for breath. Can we do that for my birthday, please? Your birthday isn't until April, baby. I know, but I want to start planning now, and I want Miss Elena to be there. Can she come to my birthday? Daniel's heart squeezed. April was 4 months away. Sophie was already thinking that far ahead, already assuming Elena would still be part of their lives. I'm sure she'd love to come, Daniel said carefully, but we should probably ask her. Okay, can we go ask her now? They drove home through streets still covered in snow, Christmas lights beginning to twinkle as dusk approached. Elena's car was in her driveway, and Sophie was out of the car before Daniel had fully parked, running through the snow to Elena's front door. By the time Daniel caught up, Elena had already answered, and Sophie was mid-explanation about the birthday party planning. So can you come? In April? Please? Elena looked over Sophie's head at Daniel, a question in her eyes. He nodded, and Elena smiled. I would be honored to come to your birthday party. Yay! Sophie hugged her, then ran back toward their house. I'm going to start making a list of what we need. Alone on the porch, Daniel and Elena looked at each other. April, Elena said. She's planning ahead. She's assuming I'll still be here. Will you be? The question was vulnerable despite everything they'd said earlier. Elena pulled him close. I'll be here in April, and May, and every month after that, if you'll have me. I'll have you, Daniel said, for as long as you want to stay. The days leading up to Christmas were full of small moments that built into something larger. Elena came over most evenings, sometimes bringing dinner, sometimes just herself. She helped Sophie with homework, learned which bedtime stories were favorites, figured out that Sophie needed exactly 10 more minutes of awake time after official bedtime, or she'd never actually fall asleep. She also learned Daniel's rhythms, when he needed space to work, when he needed company, when his quietness meant he was processing something heavy. She didn't push, didn't demand more than he could give. She just made herself available and let him come to her when he was ready. One evening, while Sophie was absorbed in a drawing at the coffee table, Elena found Daniel in the kitchen, staring at a container of cookie dough he'd made, but couldn't bring himself to bake. What's wrong? She asked softly. This was Rebecca's recipe. Her grandmother's, actually. She made these every Christmas, and I've been making them for Sophie to keep the tradition alive. But this year, he gestured helplessly. It feels different. Like if I make them with you here, I'm somehow erasing her? Elena finished gently. Yeah. Elena was quiet for a moment, thinking, what if we made them together? You and me and Sophie. And while we bake, you tell us stories about Rebecca, about what she was like at Christmas, what traditions she loved. We honor her memory while also creating new memories. Daniel looked at her, this woman who understood without judgment, who didn't feel threatened by his past, but instead found ways to honor it. That's perfect, he said. They baked the cookies together, all three of them, and Daniel told stories while they worked. About how Rebecca always burned the first batch because she got distracted. About how she'd insisted on sneaking cookie dough despite knowing it wasn't safe. About the Christmas she'd bought Sophie a toy kitchen and spent 4 hours assembling it on Christmas Eve, cursing creatively the entire time. Sophie laughed at the stories, adding her own fragmented memories. I think I remember the kitchen. It was red. And Elena listened with tears in her eyes. She sounds wonderful, Elena said later after Sophie had gone to bed and they were packaging cookies to give to neighbors. She was. And I think... Daniel paused, making sure of what he wanted to say. I think she'd like you. Would be glad that Sophie has you in her life. that I have you. You think so? I know so. Rebecca's biggest fear was that if something happened to her, Sophie and I would be alone. She made me promise I wouldn't shut myself off from the world. And I did anyway, for a long time. But now, he took Elena's hand. Now I'm keeping that promise. And I think somewhere she's relieved. Elena kissed him softly. Thank you for letting me in. To all of it. The memories and the traditions and the complicated grief. Thank you for trusting me with your whole life, not just the easy parts. Thank you for wanting the whole life. For not running when you saw how messy and complicated it is. Never, Elena said firmly. I'm in this, all the way. Christmas morning arrived cold and bright. Daniel woke early, as he always did, and started coffee. But this year, when he looked out the kitchen window, he saw smoke rising from Elena's chimney and knew she was awake too. On impulse, he texted her, "Merry Christmas. Come over when you're ready." Her response was immediate. "Give me 10 minutes. I'm bringing cinnamon rolls." Sophie woke around 7, bursting with excitement about presents. They'd established a rule years ago. Stockings first, then breakfast, then the main presents. It was a way to stretch out the magic, make the morning last. When Elena arrived with fresh cinnamon rolls and wearing the scarf Sophie had given her the night before, a handmade creation in clashing colors that Elena had pronounced absolutely perfect, Sophie launched herself into a hug. "You came! I wasn't sure if you celebrated Christmas with us or at your own house." "I celebrated a little at my house earlier," Elena said, "but I wanted to spend the day with you guys if that's okay." "It's more than okay," Sophie said. "Come see what Santa brought." They opened stockings together, Sophie narrating each discovery with enthusiasm. Daniel caught Elena's eye over Sophie's head and saw his own contentment reflected back. This was what he'd thought he'd lost forever, the joy of sharing holidays with someone who cared, not as a substitute for what he'd had with Rebecca, but as something new and precious in its own right. After stockings and cinnamon rolls, they moved to the main presents. Sophie tore through wrapping paper with gleeful abandon, each gift received with genuine excitement. A new art supply set from Daniel, books from her grandparents, a pottery painting kit from her teacher, and then Elena pulled out a wrapped package from her bag. "This is for you, Sophie, if it's okay with your dad." Daniel nodded, curious. They hadn't discussed gifts. Sophie unwrapped it carefully, and her eyes went wide. Inside was a beautiful wooden box, hand-painted with flowers and butterflies, and when she opened it, she found it full of art supplies, special paints, brushes, colorful paper, glitter, stickers. "Miss Elena," Sophie breathed, "this is amazing." "I thought you might like a special place to keep all your art things," Elena said. "I painted the box myself." Sophie traced the flowers with one finger, reverent. Then she threw her arms around Elena. "Thank you, I love it so much." Over Sophie's shoulder, Elena met Daniel's eyes again, and he mouthed, "Thank you." She'd chosen perfectly. Something meaningful and personal that showed she'd been paying attention to what Sophie loved. After Sophie had run upstairs to organize her new supplies, Daniel pulled Elena aside. "I have something for you too," he said, suddenly nervous. "It's not much, but..." He handed her a small wrapped box. Inside was a key on a simple chain. Elena looked at it, then at him, understanding dawning. "Is this..." "A key to the house," Daniel confirmed. "You're here most days anyway, and I want you to feel like this is your place too, that you can come and go, that you belong here." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Daniel, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll use it. Say you'll keep coming over at 6 in the morning with coffee because you know I'm awake. Say you'll let yourself in when I'm in the workshop and can't hear the doorbell." "Yes," Elena said, clutching the key. "Yes to all of that." She kissed him, and Daniel felt something settle deep in his chest. This was commitment. This was trust. This was choosing to build a life together. "I have something for you too," Elena said. She pulled out an envelope from her pocket. "Open it." Inside was a drawing. Elena's work, not Sophie's. It showed their two houses, but in the space between them, she'd drawn a bridge made of stars. On one side stood Daniel and Sophie, on the other stood Elena, and they were all reaching toward each other across the bridge. "The space between us," Elena said softly. We've built something across it, something beautiful and strong enough to hold all of us. Daniel couldn't speak. He just pulled her close and held on, overwhelmed by the weight of what they'd created in just a few short weeks. What had started with misunderstanding and fear had transformed into something neither of them had dared hope for. That evening, after a day full of movies and snacks, and Sophie's increasingly elaborate stories about Reginald the Snowman's adventures, Elena started to gather her things to go home. "Stay," Daniel said. Elena paused. "Stay? We have a guest room, and tomorrow's not a work day, and I don't want this day to end with you leaving. I want it to end with you here." Sophie, listening from the couch, chimed in. "Please stay, Miss Elena. You can sleep in the guest room and have breakfast with us in the morning." Elena looked between them, and Daniel could see the emotion on her face. "Okay," she said. "Yes, I'll stay." They made up the guest room together after Sophie went to bed, and when Elena emerged in borrowed pajamas, one of Daniel's old t-shirts and flannel pants, Daniel had to catch his breath. This was intimacy of a different kind. Not physical, though he wanted that too, but emotional. The intimacy of shared space and borrowed clothes and knowing someone would be there in the morning. "This okay?" Elena asked, suddenly self-conscious. "More than okay. You look—" He couldn't find the words. "You look like you belong here." They stood in the hallway outside the guest room, neither quite ready to say goodnight. "Thank you for today," Elena said. "For including me in your Christmas. For the key. For everything. Thank you for being here. For being patient while I figured out how to let you in. For loving Sophie the way you do. That's the easy part. She's incredible. She is. And she loves you too, completely." Elena's breath caught. "She said that? She doesn't have to. I can see it. In the way she lights up when you arrive. How she wants to show you everything she makes. The way she includes you in her plans for the future." He paused. "You're not just my girlfriend, Elena. You're becoming part of our family. And that's everything I didn't know I needed." Elena stepped forward and kissed him, slow and deep and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night, Elena. I'm glad you're here." "Me too. So glad." Daniel lay in his bed that night, knowing Elena was just down the hall, and felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. His house wasn't empty anymore. His life wasn't just about surviving or maintaining routines. He'd let someone in, really in, and the world hadn't ended. Sophie wasn't traumatized. The memory of Rebecca wasn't diminished. Instead, everything had expanded. His capacity for joy, his willingness to hope, his understanding that love wasn't a finite resource to be rationed, but something that grew when you shared it. In the morning, he woke to the smell of coffee and followed it downstairs to find Elena in his kitchen, already brewing a pot, looking completely at home. Sophie appeared moments later, delighted to find Elena still there, and they made breakfast together, all three of them moving around the kitchen in a dance that was becoming familiar. This was what Daniel had been so afraid of. This ordinary, beautiful, complicated domesticity. The way Elena knew where he kept the spatulas now. The way Sophie automatically set 3 places at the table instead of 2. The way it all felt so natural, like they'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. "What should we do today?" Sophie asked through a mouthful of pancakes. "Whatever you want, baby girl," Daniel said. "Can we take Miss Elena to see the lights downtown, the big ones by the Capitol?" Daniel looked at Elena, a question in his eyes. She nodded, smiling. "That sounds perfect." They spent the day together, the 3 of them, walking through downtown Boise, looking at Christmas lights and drinking hot cider. Sophie held both their hands, swinging between them, chattering about everything and nothing. Strangers probably thought they were a family, mom, dad, and daughter, and for the first time that thought didn't scare Daniel. It filled him with quiet joy. Because they were becoming a family. Not in a way that erased what came before, but in a way that honored the past while building something new. Something that included all of them, Daniel's grief and Sophie's resilience and Elena's careful courage, all woven together into something stronger than any of them could have created alone. That night, after Elena had finally gone home and Sophie was asleep, Daniel stood at his window looking toward her house. The light was on, as always, and as he watched, Elena appeared in her window. She held up her hand, and Daniel saw the glint of the key he'd given her, hanging on its chain around her neck. He pressed his palm to the window. She did the same. Two people, in separate houses, but connected now in ways that mattered, building a bridge across the space between them. One careful, honest, brave step at a time. And Daniel knew, with a certainty that surprised him, that this was just the beginning. The week between Christmas and New Year's had always felt suspended to Daniel, like the world was holding its breath between one year and the next. This year, that feeling intensified, charged with the awareness that something fundamental was shifting in his life. Elena had started using the key he'd given her, letting herself in on mornings when she knew he'd be up, bringing coffee or pastries or sometimes just herself. The casualness of it, the way she'd kick off her boots in the entryway and hang her coat on the hook that had somehow become hers, made Daniel's chest tight with emotion he was still learning to name. Sophie treated Elena's increased presence as the most natural thing in the world. She'd started saying things like, "We should ask Elena if she wants to come," or "Elena likes the blue plates better," with the easy acceptance of a child who'd already decided where someone belonged. Daniel watched this integration with equal parts joy and terror, knowing that every day they grew closer was another day Sophie would be hurt if things fell apart. But Elena showed no signs of falling apart. If anything, she seemed to settle more deeply into their lives with each passing day. On the 28th of December, Daniel was in his workshop refinishing a client's antique dresser when Elena appeared in the doorway. She'd let herself in through the front door, found him in the garage, and now stood watching him work with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Hey," he said, setting down his sandpaper. "Everything okay? Can we talk?" His stomach dropped. Those three words, in his experience, rarely preceded good news. "Of course, let me just—" "Here's fine." She stepped into the workshop, closing the door behind her. The space suddenly felt smaller, more intimate. "I've been thinking about something, and I need to be honest with you about it." Daniel braced himself, trying to prepare for whatever was coming. This was it. She'd realized single fatherhood was too complicated. She wanted out before things got more serious. "I want to meet Sophie's grandparents," Elena said. Whatever Daniel had been expecting, it wasn't that. "What?" "Your in-laws, Rebecca's parents. Sophie talks about them sometimes, and I know they're part of her life. And if we're building something real here, I should meet them. They should know about me." Daniel sat down heavily on his work stool, processing this. "Elena, you don't have to do that. Richard and Patricia are wonderful, but they're also protective. Meeting you might be complicated for them." "I know, and I'm not trying to replace their daughter or claim some position I haven't earned, but Daniel, if we're serious about this, about us, then eventually everyone in Sophie's life needs to know about me. Your parents, your friends, Sophie's grandparents. We can't keep this separate forever." She was right, Daniel knew. They'd been existing in a kind of bubble, just the three of them, but real life meant integration. It meant introducing Elena to people who knew his history, who remembered Rebecca, who might have complicated feelings about him moving on. "They're coming for New Year's," Daniel said quietly. "They always do. Stay overnight, do brunch on New Year's Day, make it a whole thing with Sophie." "Then maybe I should meet them then. If you think it's too soon, I understand, but it's not too soon." Daniel stood, moving to stand in front of her. "You're right. If we're doing this, really doing this, then they should meet you. I just want you to be prepared. Richard might be quiet at first, Patricia might ask pointed questions, and they're both going to be thinking about Rebecca. Of course they will be. She was their daughter, but I'm not trying to erase her, Daniel. I just want to be part of your future, our future." Daniel pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "Okay, New Year's Eve, but I'm warning you now. Patricia makes a brisket that could bring about world peace, and Richard tells the same stories every time he visits. Fair warning." He felt Elena smile against his chest. "I can handle brisket and repeated stories." When Daniel told Sophie that evening that Elena would be joining them for New Year's, his daughter's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "Yes, Grandma and Grandpa are going to love her." "We don't know that, baby. They might need time to adjust to the idea." Sophie gave him that look. The one that said she understood things adults thought she couldn't. They want you to be happy, Dad. And Elena makes you happy. They'll see that. Out of the mouths of babes, Daniel thought. Still, he spent the next 2 days in a state of low-level anxiety, running through scenarios in his mind. How would he introduce Elena? What would he say about their relationship? How would Patricia react to seeing another woman in the kitchen Rebecca had loved? Richard and Patricia Williams arrived on New Year's Eve afternoon, their car loaded with presents for Sophie and ingredients for the elaborate meal Patricia insisted on cooking every year. They were in their mid-60s, both retired teachers, with the kind of warm competence that had made Daniel understand exactly where Rebecca got her nurturing nature. Sophie launched herself at them the moment they walked through the door, and Daniel watched his in-laws transform, the way they always did around their granddaughter, into younger, lighter versions of themselves. This was what kept them connected, Daniel knew. Not obligation or even affection for him, but love for Sophie. Their last living connection to the daughter they'd lost. After the initial greetings and the flurry of Sophie showing them her latest drawings, Daniel found a quiet moment with them in the kitchen while Sophie played upstairs. "So," Patricia said, already pulling out containers and organizing ingredients with the efficiency of someone who'd cooked in many kitchens. "How have you been, Daniel?" "Really good," he said. "Really good, actually. Which is, there's something I need to talk to you both about." Richard, arranging bottles in the refrigerator, paused. Patricia's hand stilled over a cutting board. They both looked at him with identical expressions of careful concern. "I've been seeing someone," Daniel said, and the words came out steadier than he'd expected. "My neighbor, Elena. It's relatively new, but it's serious, and she's going to join us tonight. I wanted you to know before she got here." The silence that followed wasn't hostile exactly, but it was heavy. Patricia recovered first. "Seen someone? As in dating?" "Yes, and she's met Sophie." "Sophie loves her. They've gotten close over the past few months." Patricia and Richard exchanged a look, one of those wordless married couple communications that conveyed entire conversations. "I see," Patricia said finally. "And you felt ready for this? To bring someone new into Sophie's life?" The question wasn't accusatory, but Daniel heard the concern beneath it. They'd watched him struggle through the first year after Rebecca's death, had seen how he'd shut down emotionally, how he'd built his entire existence around Sophie to the exclusion of everything else. They'd worried, he knew, but they'd also understood. "I didn't feel ready," Daniel admitted. "I fought against it for a long time, but Elena, she's special. She's patient and kind and wonderful with Sophie, and she's not trying to replace Rebecca. She understands that Rebecca will always be part of our lives." "No one could replace Rebecca," Richard said quietly, and there was grief in his voice that 3 years hadn't erased. "I know, and I'm not trying to, but I also can't spend the rest of my life alone because I'm afraid of dishonoring her memory. Rebecca wouldn't have wanted that." "No," Patricia said, her eyes bright. "She wouldn't have. She made you promise, didn't she? Before, at the hospital. She made you promise not to close yourself off." Daniel's throat tightened. He'd forgotten they knew about that. About those last moments when Rebecca, barely conscious but fighting to stay present, had gripped his hand and made him swear he'd take care of himself, not just Sophie, that he'd let himself love again someday. "She did," he whispered. Patricia crossed the kitchen and pulled him into a hug, the first real physical affection she'd shown him in months. "Then I'm glad you're keeping that promise. I'm glad you found someone. We just want to make sure—" Her voice caught. "We want to make sure you're being careful, that Sophie is protected." "She's my whole world," Daniel said. "Everything I do is about protecting her." "We know," Richard said, joining them. "We know you're a good father, the best father Sophie could have. And if this Elena makes you happy, if she's good to our granddaughter, then we'd like to meet her." The relief Daniel felt was physical, like releasing a breath he'd been holding for days. "Thank you. That means everything." Elena arrived at 6:30, carrying a bottle of wine and a box of cookies she'd baked that afternoon. She'd dressed carefully, nice jeans and a soft blue sweater, her hair down, minimal makeup. Not trying too hard, but clearly wanting to make a good impression. Daniel met her at the door, took the wine and cookies, and leaned in close. "You okay?" he murmured. "Terrified," she admitted. "But ready." He kissed her forehead. "They're going to love you." "You don't know that." "I know they're going to see what I see, what Sophie sees, and that'll be enough." They walked into the kitchen together, and Daniel made the introductions. "Patricia, Richard, this is Elena Wright. Elena, these are Sophie's grandparents, Patricia and Richard Williams." There was a moment of assessment on both sides. Patricia's eyes sharp and evaluating, Richard's more reserved. Then Patricia stepped forward and extended her hand. "It's nice to meet you, Elena. Sophie's been talking about you all afternoon." "It's an honor to meet you both," Elena said, shaking hands with both of them. "Sophie talks about you all the time. I feel like I already know you a little." "Well, we don't know much about you yet," Richard said, but his tone wasn't unfriendly. "But we'd like to." "Daniel says you're a teacher?" "Elementary art, 3rd through 5th grade. That must be rewarding work." "It is. I get to spend my days covered in paint and glitter and watching kids discover they can create things. It's the best job I could imagine." Patricia, still watching Elena carefully, seemed to relax slightly. "Sophie mentioned you painted a box for her, for Christmas." "I did. She's so creative, I thought she deserved a special place to keep all her supplies." That was thoughtful. The conversation was polite but careful, everyone feeling out the boundaries of this new dynamic. Sophie blessedly burst into the kitchen at that moment and grabbed Elena's hand. "Come see what Grandpa brought me. It's a whole kit for making friendship bracelets." Elena let herself be pulled away, and Daniel was left alone with his in-laws. Patricia immediately turned to him. "She seems lovely." "She is. And Sophie clearly adores her. They have a special bond." Patricia was quiet for a moment, then, "She doesn't look anything like Rebecca." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "No, she doesn't." "Good," Patricia said, surprising him. "I was worried you might be looking for a replacement, someone who could fill the hole Rebecca left. But she's her own person, isn't she?" "Completely. She's nothing like Rebecca, and I think that's part of why it works. I'm not trying to recreate what I lost. I'm building something new." "That's healthy," Richard said. "Grief should transform us, not trap us." They helped Patricia finish preparing dinner, and Daniel watched Elena navigate the evening with grace. She asked questions about Rebecca, not prying, but genuine interest. What had she been like as a child? What were her favorite things? What did she love about being a mother? Patricia answered haltingly at first, but as Elena listened with real attention, sharing her own stories about losing people she loved, the older woman began to open up. By the time dinner was served, they were talking almost like friends. Over brisket that was indeed phenomenal, Richard told his usual stories. Daniel had heard them all a dozen times, but Elena laughed in all the right places and asked follow-up questions that showed she was actually listening. Sophie was in heaven, having all her favorite people in one place, and kept reaching for Elena's hand under the table like she needed the physical confirmation that this was real. After dinner, while Sophie helped her grandmother with dishes, their tradition, Daniel and Richard found themselves alone on the back porch, watching snow fall in the backyard. "She's good for you," Richard said after a long silence. "Yeah?" "You smile more, move lighter. Sophie notices these things, you know. She's told us you seem happier lately." Daniel felt emotion well up. "I am happier. It terrifies me sometimes, but I am." "Good. That's good." Richard paused. "I loved my daughter more than life itself, Daniel. When we lost her, I thought the grief would kill me. Patricia, too. And watching you try to raise Sophie alone, watching you struggle, it was agony. We wanted to help more, but we didn't know how. You helped plenty. You're still helping. We tried, but we also knew you needed to find your own way through it, and it looks like you have. Elena seems like a good woman, kind, genuine. She loves Sophie." "She does. And she loves you." It wasn't a question. Daniel nodded anyway. "She does. And I love her." "Then hold on to that," Richard said quietly. "Life's too short and too unpredictable to let happiness slip away because we're afraid. Rebecca knew that. It's why she made you promise."
They stood together in the cold, two men bound by loss and love for the same little girl, and Daniel felt something heal that he hadn't known was still broken. He had his in-laws' blessing, not their permission, he hadn't needed that, but their genuine support. It mattered more than he'd realized.
As midnight approached, they all gathered in the living room, Sophie in pajamas but refusing to go to bed, Patricia and Richard on the couch, Daniel and Elena in the armchairs with Sophie perched on the armrest of Elena's chair. They watched the countdown on TV, and when midnight struck, everyone cheered. Sophie hugged her grandparents first, then turned to Elena and Daniel. "Happy New Year! This is the best New Year's ever!" "Happy New Year, baby girl," Daniel said, pulling her into his arms. Elena hugged them both, and over Sophie's head, Daniel met Patricia's eyes. She was crying quietly, but she was smiling too. She nodded at him, permission, blessing, encouragement, all in one small gesture. After Patricia and Richard had retired to the guest room and Sophie was finally asleep, Daniel and Elena stood in the kitchen cleaning up the last of the dishes. "That went well," Elena said. "Better than I hoped." "They liked you, I could tell. Patricia told me I was good for you, that she hadn't seen you this happy since—" Elena stopped, but Daniel knew what she'd been about to say. "Since before Rebecca died," he finished. "It's okay. You can say her name, you can talk about her." "I know, but I also don't want you to think I'm trying to compete with a memory." Daniel set down the dish he'd been washing and turned to face her fully. "You're not competing. That's not how this works. Rebecca was my first love, the mother of my child, and I'll always carry her with me. But you're my future, Elena. You're the person I'm choosing to build a life with. Those things don't cancel each other out." "Your future," Elena repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." "Good. Because I've been thinking—" He paused, suddenly nervous. This wasn't how he'd planned to do this, but standing in his kitchen at 1 a.m. on New Year's Day with this woman who'd changed everything, it felt right. "I've been thinking about the future a lot lately, about what I want it to look like. And I want you in it, permanently. Not just as my girlfriend or the woman next door. I want you here, with us, building this life together." Elena's breath caught. "Daniel, what are you saying?" "I'm saying—" He took her hands, grounding himself. "I'm not asking you to marry me right now. I know it's too soon, and I want to do this right. But I'm asking if you could see yourself wanting that someday. Being part of this family officially, being Sophie's—" He struggled with the word. "Being another mother figure in her life. Being my partner in everything." Tears were streaming down Elena's face now. Yes, I can see that. I want that. Not right now, like you said, but someday? Definitely someday." Daniel pulled her close, and they stood wrapped in each other, swaying slightly in the quiet kitchen. This was commitment. This was choosing each other with eyes wide open, knowing all the complications and fears and risks, and deciding they were worth it anyway. "I love you," Daniel said into her hair. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I love you too, and I promise I'm not going anywhere. Whatever comes, we face it together." They stayed like that until the dishwasher finished its cycle, until the house settled into complete stillness, until the first hints of dawn began touching the horizon. Then they reluctantly separated, Elena to go home and get a few hours of sleep, Daniel to his own bed. But before she left, she used her key to lock the door behind her, a small gesture that felt monumental. She had access now. She belonged here. This was her home too, or it was becoming one. The winter weeks that followed were full of small integrations that built into something larger. Elena started keeping clothes in the guest room for nights she stayed over. Her coffee mug got its own place in the cabinet. Sophie started asking, "Can Elena come?" for every activity, assuming her presence as default rather than exception. In February, on a night when snow was falling thick outside and Sophie was at a sleepover, Daniel and Elena sat in his living room with a bottle of wine and talked about logistics. "I've been thinking about selling my house," Elena said, the words coming carefully. Daniel's heart skipped. "Yeah? I mean, not immediately, but eventually. It seems silly to maintain two households when I'm here most of the time anyway. And the money from the sale could go toward, I don't know, Sophie's college fund or renovations here,
or just security for all of us. Are you sure? That's a big step. I'm sure. This is where I want to be. Where I want to build my life, she paused. But I want to make sure we do it right. That Sophie is comfortable with the change. That we're not rushing into something that could destabilize her.
We should talk to her about it, Daniel said. See how she feels. They had that conversation the next weekend, the three of them sitting at the kitchen table over hot chocolate. Sophie, we wanted to talk to you about something, Daniel started. About Elena maybe living here with us full time. Sophie's eyes went wide. Like moving in? For real? For real, Elena confirmed, but only if you're comfortable with it. This is your home, and your opinion matters most. Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, would you sleep in the guest room? Daniel and Elena exchanged glances. They'd been navigating the physical boundaries of their relationship carefully, aware that Sophie was watching and learning. Probably not forever, Elena said honestly. Eventually, if everyone is comfortable with it, I'd probably share a room with your dad. But we'd take that slow too. Make sure it felt right for everyone. Would you help with my homework and make breakfast sometimes and come to my school stuff? All of that, if you want me to. Sophie considered this with the seriousness she brought to all major decisions. What about Mom? If Elena lives here, does that mean we forget about Mom? Daniel's chest tightened, but Elena answered before he could. Never, she said firmly. Your mom will always be important. We'll keep her pictures up, keep telling stories about her, keep all the traditions your dad has built to honor her memory. I'm not trying to replace her, Sophie. I'm just trying to be someone who loves you and your dad. There's room for all of that. Sophie thought about this, then nodded. Okay. Then yes. I want Elena to live here. It'll be like having a family again. A bigger one. Daniel had to turn away, overwhelmed. Sophie's words, having a family again, gutted him with their honesty. She'd been missing this, he realized. Not just a mother figure, but the feeling of completeness, of being part of something larger than just the two of them. By March, they'd made concrete plans. Elena would put her house on the market in April, after the school year was winding down. If it sold quickly, she'd move in over the summer, giving them time to adjust before the new school year started. They'd convert the guest room into Elena's study, a space that was wholly hers within their shared home. Sophie helped plan the changes with the enthusiasm she brought to all creative projects. She drew elaborate sketches of how Elena's study should look, where furniture should go, what colors to paint the walls. It should feel like Miss Elena, Sophie declared, warm and artistic, and she struggled for the word, homey. They painted the room a soft sage green, hung shelves for Elena's books and art supplies, found a comfortable chair where she could read or work. It was small but perfect, a space carved out within the larger home that said, this is where Elena belongs. On a warm evening in early April, just days before Sophie's birthday party, the one she'd been planning since December, Daniel and Elena sat on the back porch watching Sophie play in the yard. Reginald had long since melted, but Sophie had built an elaborate fairy garden in his place, complete with tiny houses and painted rocks. I can't believe how much has changed, Elena said softly. 6 months ago, I was convincing myself to stay away from you, that caring about you was too dangerous. 6 months ago, I was telling myself the same thing, Daniel replied, that keeping everyone at a distance was the only way to protect Sophie. And now I know that the opposite is true, that loving people, letting people in, is what keeps us whole, what keeps us human. Elena leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm glad we were both brave enough to try, even when it was terrifying. Me too. Sophie looked up from her fairy garden and waved at them. They waved back, and Daniel felt a peace he'd never expected to feel again. This was his life now, not just surviving, but thriving, not just protecting, but nurturing, not just enduring, but actually enjoying the everyday moments that made up a life. The birthday party, when it came, was exactly what Sophie had wanted. Homemade pizzas, a dozen of her closest friends, and Elena fully integrated into the celebration as someone who belonged. Patricia and Richard came too, and Daniel watched his mother-in-law and Elena work side by side in the kitchen, chatting comfortably about recipes and school stories. After the party, after the kids were picked up and the house was quiet again,
Elena found Daniel in the kitchen cleaning up. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For letting me be part of this. Part of her life, part of your life. I know it wasn't easy choosing to open up after everything you'd been through." "It was the best decision I ever made," Daniel said honestly. "You've given me my life back, given Sophie the kind of home I wanted her to have but couldn't create on my own." "We created it together," Elena corrected gently. "That's what makes it work." In May, Elena's house sold to a young couple expecting their first child. She moved out on a Saturday, and Daniel, Sophie, and a handful of friends helped carry boxes and furniture. Some things went into storage, some were integrated into Daniel's house, their house now, and some were donated. That night, after everything was settled and Sophie was asleep, Elena stood in her new study surrounded by boxes still needing to be unpacked. "This is real now," she said. "I live here. This is home." Daniel wrapped his arms around her from behind. "This has been your home for a while now. We were just making it official." "I know, but still, it feels huge." "Huge good or huge scary?" "Huge perfect," Elena said, turning in his arms. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." They kissed, and Daniel felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. This was his family now, him, Sophie, and Elena. Not a replacement for what he'd lost, but something new and precious in its own right. The months that followed were full of adjustments, both big and small. Learning to share space fully, negotiating household responsibilities, figuring out rhythms that worked for all three of them. There were moments of friction, disagreements about discipline approaches with Sophie, stress about finances, nights when Daniel's grief resurfaced and he needed space to process alone. But through it all, they communicated. They stayed honest. They chose each other again and again, even when it was hard. On a quiet evening in December, almost exactly a year after that first conversation on Elena's porch, when everything changed, Daniel found himself in the same position, standing in his kitchen late at night, looking toward what used to be Elena's house but was now occupied by that young couple with their new baby. But this time, he wasn't looking with longing. He was just observing, remembering. "What are you thinking about?" Elena asked, coming up behind him and wrapping her arms around his waist. "How much can change in a year? How different everything is now." "Better different?" "So much better." He turned to face her. "I was thinking Sophie's been asking questions about when we're getting married." Elena's eyes widened. "She has?" "She wants to know if she can call you Mom, if you're going to officially be her mother." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that was something you and I needed to decide together, but that I thought—" He reached into his pocket, his heart pounding. "I thought maybe we should make it official." He pulled out a small velvet box, and Elena's hands flew to her mouth. "Daniel, I wanted to do this right. Take our time, make sure we were both ready, and I think we are. I think we've built something strong enough to last, something worth celebrating and protecting and making official." He opened the box, revealing a simple ring, white gold with a small diamond. "Elena Wright, will you marry me? Will you officially become part of this family? Will you be my wife and Sophie's—" His voice broke. "And Sophie's mother?" Elena was crying, nodding before she could speak. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and they held each other in the quiet kitchen, both overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were promising. This was forever. This was choosing to build a life together, through whatever came. This was family, in the truest sense. They told Sophie at the morning, and her reaction was pure joy, screaming, jumping, running to call her grandparents immediately. Patricia and Richard were thrilled, offering to help plan the wedding, to be part of welcoming Elena officially into the family. They married in April, on the first anniversary of Sophie's birthday party, where everything had felt so right. It was a small ceremony in their backyard with close friends and family, Sophie serving as their flower girl in a dress she'd helped pick out. Patricia cried through the entire ceremony. Richard stood beside Daniel as his best man, a gesture that meant more than words could express. When Daniel and Elena exchanged vows, they did so with Sophie standing between them, her hands clasped in both of theirs. Because this wasn't just a marriage between two people,
It was the formation of a family, the official recognition of what they'd been building all along.
I promise to love you, Daniel said, his voice steady despite his emotion. To choose you every day. To build a life with you that honors the past while embracing the future. To be your partner in everything. I promise to love you, Elena echoed. To be patient and brave and honest. To love Sophie as my own. To create a home where all of us can grow and heal and become our best selves. And Sophie, when asked if she had anything to say, simply said, I'm glad you both stopped being scared. I love you. There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering. The reception was simple. Food and music and the people they loved most, celebrating not just a wedding, but the journey that had brought them here. Daniel danced with his daughter, with his new wife, with Patricia, who told him through tears that Rebecca would be so happy for him. She wanted this for you, Patricia whispered. Wanted you to find love again. Wanted Sophie to have a mother who chose her. I see her sometimes, you know.
In the way you smile now, like you're carrying less weight, like you remember how to be happy. I am happy, Daniel said. Really, truly happy. That night, after the guests had left and Sophie had finally crashed from exhaustion in her room, Daniel and Elena stood in their bedroom, officially theirs now, no more separate spaces, and looked at each other as husband and wife. We did it, Elena said. We built this. Against all the fear and doubt and resistance, we built something real. We did, Daniel agreed, and we're going to keep building it for the rest of our lives. They fell asleep wrapped in each other, and when Daniel woke in the morning to sunlight streaming through the windows, Elena beside him, Sophie's feet padding down the hallway toward their room, he felt a contentment he'd thought was lost forever. This was his life now. Not just surviving day to day, not just protecting what remained after loss, but actively creating joy. Building a family that honored the past while embracing the future. Loving fully, despite the fear, because the love was worth the risk. Sophie burst through the door, jumped onto the bed between them, and announced, Pancakes! Elena, you said you'd teach me to make them from scratch. I did say that, didn't I? Elena laughed, ruffling Sophie's hair. Can we? Now? Give us 10 minutes to wake up, kiddo, Daniel said, pulling his daughter close. Then we'll make the best pancakes you've ever had. The best pancakes we've ever had, Sophie corrected. All of us together. All of us together, Daniel agreed, meeting Elena's eyes over their daughter's head. And that's how it went, day after day, moment after moment. Building a life together with intention and care, and the kind of love that grew stronger with every challenge they faced as a team. Daniel had thought his story ended with loss, that the best he could hope for was dignified survival. But Elena had shown him a different truth, that stories don't end, they just transform. That love doesn't run out, it expands to fill whatever space you give it. That morning, making pancakes in a kitchen full of laughter and flour and the chaotic joy of family, Daniel understood what Rebecca had been trying to tell him in those final moments. Not to forget her, but to keep living. To keep loving, to keep opening his heart to possibility even when it was terrifying. Because that's what made life worth living. Not the absence of pain or fear, but the presence of connection. The courage to be vulnerable. The willingness to build something beautiful knowing it might be fragile, but building it anyway because some things were worth the risk. Sophie, Elena, and Daniel, a family forged not by biology alone, but by choice, by patience, by the daily decision to show up for each other. It wasn't the family Daniel had imagined when he first became a father. It was different, more complicated, built from broken pieces, carefully fitted back together. But it was real. It was theirs. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.